Good morning, Express Nation. I'm your host, Coach Simmons, and we're going to go ahead and jump straight into the conversation because there's a couple takeaways that I want to talk about this college football season, being that it's already week 9 and the end of the season is approaching extremely fast. And one of the things that I want to talk about is I've noticed that a player evaluation has been completely lopsided. Coming into the season, a lot of player evaluation, we had Arch Mannings and Cade Klubniks and Garrett Nussmeyers and DJ Lagways and a bunch of different players considerably be the top of the top. They're going to be the best of the best. And then you had guys like Gunnar Stockton, Ty Simpson, Fernando Mendiza, for whatever said reason, not being evaluated correctly. Like Ty Simpson, folks didn't believe he could elevate their offense, or Gunnar Stockton, they didn't believe he was going to be a starter by week 8, and Fernando Mendiza, they thought him going to Indiana was a bad choice for his career and development because that wasn't going to be a really good program. Like last year was a fluke, when clearly this goes into point 2. Indiana was clearly a dominant team. Like they're going to be a good 9 to 10 win team for the remainder time, I think, next 3 or 4 years, however long they have Kurt Cinetti. So, and this goes into point 2, player evaluation. We're not evaluating players correctly. We missed on a lot. I know I missed on a lot. A lot of top-tier analysts missed on a lot. I don't think there's been a lot of underrated analysts that really hit on the nose. So, like, player evaluation was a complete miss, I think, across the board. There's some exceptions here and there. But this goes into point 2. Like, I think NIL has completely changed the landscape of college football. You take teams like Vandy, Georgia Tech, Indiana, for example, teams that nobody really expected to be dominant teams. You go 10, 15 years back, you're not going to say these teams are fighting for an SEC, Big Ten, or ACC title. You look at schools like BYU, Texas Tech, even Houston. Like, you wouldn't say like they're competing inside their conference. Like, Houston going over to the Big 12 was a big jump, and they thought it was going to take some time to adjust. But right now they're like 6-1 on the season. BYU undefeated. They've had a great 2 or 3 year stint in the Big 12 so far. Cincinnati's been able to turn it around after losing their head coach, and now Cincinnati's looking like a top program in the Big 12. So there's a lot of different programs that have completely turned it around because of NIL, and that's kind of changed the landscape on evaluating teams. So evaluating players and evaluating teams have been completely opposite. Like, everyone thought Virginia, okay, they got to get some things together. Their roster's not the strongest, but look at how they're performing in the ACC. Texas Tech, they got to get chemistry together, because just because you have NIL money, that doesn't mean anything. Look at where they're performing at. They're 6-1. So NIL has completely changed like the landscape of college football, not just like how teams are structured and who gets who, but also how we evaluate the players and evaluate the teams and who we expect to be the best of the best and who's not. And I don't think the gap in between teams is as large as it used to be. I think the gap in talent has shrunk because of NIL. You're starting to have more of an equal playing field. And I think a lot of folks expected like your top tier teams that were still winning to still pay out money and they're going to win continuously. But we're not really seeing that. Like, Michigan's falling off a little bit. Alabama, they're not necessarily falling off, but everyone's in the SEC has came to the Bama level now. Same thing with the Big Ten. Ohio State necessarily hasn't fallen off, but you have a lot of schools now coming to that level. Big 12, everyone's now playing at an equal play field. ACC, everyone's at the same play field. Obviously, Ohio State and Bama is still going to be top of the top when we talk about, top tier conference or top tier teams. Those two teams are going to be stuck out bigger than anybody else in college football. But the overall play field, the overall talent gap has shrunk. Now, that's kind of the boring information that I have for y'all. we're going to go ahead and go and talk about some of the games we got. So last week was very exciting. Ole Miss versus Georgia was a fireworks show. As a Georgia fan, it hurt me to see because our defense was lacking. Our defense has lacked all year long, getting torched with the DBs. They leave zones open, or they just can't get off blocks, or they miss tackles. Like, the overall ability of our DBs have been lacking this year. Alabama, on the other hand, their DBs have started to come together. Like, very early on, their DBs were having a hard time in the run game, just like ours. But they have kind of molded together, and they've developed. And that's something I've said about Alabama. They've developed every facet. Every week, they try to improve something that they struggled on the week priors. And they've done that. And you've seen that improvement every single week. So their likelihood of winning the SEC is very likely. But I'll go ahead and talk about that next week on my predictions for the conference. But when you look at, like, Miami, this is the team that is very strong defensively. Offensively, them throwing those interceptions was something I low-key expected. I did not expect Carson Beck to continue to throw a perfect season. He threw 4. Louisville now put themselves into the position to go into the ACC title game. Minnesota is kind of a dark horse team that I talked about, beating Nebraska. If Minnesota can continue to rack up some wins, they get Iowa this week. One of the games I highlighted on my Pick'ems graphics that I put out on social media. But I highlighted Minnesota. If Minnesota can win out their schedule, which I think they have one of the easier schedules when you look at who they have to play out of the dark horses, they probably have one of the lighter schedules. Now, it's not going to be necessarily easy. Nothing's easy. But they have one of the lighter schedules. So seeing Minnesota win out would be pretty funny because they only have 2 losses, and one of those to Ohio State. But one of my biggest takeaways from Week 8 is the fact that Vandy has been so dominant. That's something I talked about in one of my takeaways of just overall talent evaluation and team evaluation. It's like these teams you did not expect to be dominating are dominating. Like, Vandy's a top 10 team. At no point in time would you have ever expected Vandy ever being a top 10 team. But Vandy's in prime position to go into the ACC or SEC title game. And this kind of leads me into my game day picks. All right, starting us off, my first game day pick is Memphis versus South Florida. I've been a big South Florida guy. I've been riding with South Florida since their Boise State game. Coming into the season, I thought South Florida with the team, Baron Brown was back. They had such a dynamic quarterback. Their offense is amazing. Defensively, they can struggle at times. But the thing about this team they're just fun to watch, but they're sloppy. But they're sloppy and aggressive. So they're like a big mix of good and bad. Like, they have really great things going on, but they're a really sloppy team, which makes it really bad for their program. But they're a really dynamic team to watch. I honestly love watching their product on the field. So for me, South Florida and Memphis is a highly structured offense. They can put up a lot of points on a weak defense, on a sloppy defense. They did it against Arkansas, so they definitely can do it against South Florida. But I think South Florida has the aggressiveness and the poise in tight games to pull away. So even if this is a tight game going into the fourth quarter, I think South Florida is going to have the opportunity. They have the mental ability to get themselves over that hump in the fourth quarter. They're one of the teams I trust to win out in a fourth quarter shootout. My second game. I've been trying to do a little bit of upsets, but, as we're getting into the deep part of the season, the upsets have kind of lessened as we're getting into the deep part of the season. Because my next game on the list is Missouri versus Vandy. Missouri, for me, I like Provula. I think he's going to develop fine. Another year, he's going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC. As long as that team doesn't get broken apart by NIL. But as of right now, what they showed me against Auburn on the road, they're having a hard time on the road. Mainly because they've played at home all season and they lost to Alabama at home. I think that went to their mental. They're going to probably want a get-back game to get their head back on. They kind of get that head from spinning. But with Vandy, this is their second home game in a row. They just beat a top 13, top 15 LSU team just last week to put them in the top 10. So now for Vandy, their gears are spinning. Their motors are running at 100. They're ready to take off. Diego has the highest level of confidence that you're going to find in a quarterback right now. Their tight end, Stokes, is a monster. Don't matter where you throw him the ball, outside, inside. He can run routes. He's going to be able to match out a linebacker in coverage. You can't really put a DV on him because of his size. So with the way that team is forming, if they can rely on that running game a little bit and not go away from it like they did against Bama, because Missouri's defense is not no joke. They are going to slam the run. They did it against Bama. They did it against Auburn. They're going to slam the run. So this is going to be another Diego get the ball, make plays type of situation. But if they can extend that pocket with the run game by going out east or west to east, coast to coast, open up the run game, allow the pocket to not have so much pressure on it because they're worried about the run with RPOs or play action. And Diego, I think he's going to have the ability to win this game. So I'm going to go with Vandy over Missouri in this one. Now, for my last game, it was kind of hard for me to choose. Because I don't want to go SEC, but when you look at the rest of the slate, you got Illinois and Washington, BYU, Iowa State, Cincinnati, Baylor, LSU, A&M. That's a marquee game, but it's not as big as your 12 o'clock Ole Miss going to Norman, number 8 versus number 13. This game right here is going to determine the future of this, the outcome of these two teams for the rest of the year. Like, one of these two teams, if they win this game, more than likely they're going to the playoffs, even if they don't make the SEC championship game. So for Ole Miss, this is a must-win situation where, they lost to Georgia, but they got to win this game. They can continue their season. Oklahoma's the same deal. For me, a lot of critics on Oklahoma was they weren't opening the run game. The way they were running the ball, they just wasn't fitting the scheme right. Their offensive line just couldn't fit whatever running scheme they had going on. And that was a big problem because it was John Mateer or bust. But now, South Carolina, they opened up the run a little bit. They was able to run the ball. The best running game they've had out of their running backs and their offensive line all season. John Mateer was able to stand in the pocket more, deliver the ball, be more of a pocket passer instead of really running the ball. And you've seen in that game, they dominated. Defense still top tier. I mean, their defense is going to continuously be one of the top 3 defenses in the SEC. I think that's been the strongest point of their team the entire season. That's going to continuously be their strongest point. And for Ole Miss, their strongest facet of the game is their offense. They're going to score points. They got one of the best offenses in the SEC, probably the best in the SEC. And defensively, they're really weak. They've had good defensive performance, but not against good offenses. And for Oklahoma, for Ole Miss, they're going to have to be banking on that. That was just a one-game wonder for South Carolina against South Carolina, because if Oklahoma can bring in that type of offense that they brought in against South Carolina in the run game, then they can definitely go into Ole Miss and have a great shootout. But if Ole Miss defense decides to come in and play like they did against LSU, which in offense that's kind of struggled, but LSU's offense has similar struggles to Oklahoma. So if LSU can exploit those, do them like they did LSU, then Ole Miss is going to have a solid day at the office. For this, it was a 50-50 take on who I would go with, Oklahoma or Ole Miss. But I think Ole Miss is a little bit more certain. They've showed a lot more consistencies in their game. And it's mainly just because their offense can score and their defense have showed up at times to be able to stop opposing offenses. And I'm just not 100% locked in on Oklahoma's offense. Before we get out of here, there's a couple other games I want to highlight. UCLA goes to Indiana this week. UCLA has been red hot. I was going to highlight this as an upset game, but I've been liking Indiana. Georgia Tech has a home game against Syracuse, which should be another lights-out game. It's going to be a close game for Tech. You have Illinois going to Washington in a game that was very close for me to choose as an upset. And I really do think Washington does have the ability to beat Illinois, being that it's a home game. You know, teams going to the West Coast have been a very bad thing, but it's Illinois and Washington. I don't think they're too far apart. BYU, Iowa State, that's going to be extremely fun out of the Big 12. Big 12 has been great to watch this year, by the way. I mean, they're by far one of the best conferences, you know, competitively to watch. From top to bottom, I don't think any team is better. You know, your top team is just as bad as your bad team, and your bad team is just as good as your good team. So, like, there's no diversity in the teams whatsoever. It's just whoever gets the luck of the draw and actually gets the win. That's how the Big 12 is played out. Like, do you just have the luck of the draw? Can you edge one out and get the win? You know, Texas Tech looked like the best team, but Iowa State won. Or Arizona State won. But Utah dismantled Arizona State. So, like, but they didn't have their starting quarterback. You know, Cincinnati put it on Iowa State. Iowa State lost to Colorado. So, like, there's a lot of competitiveness in the Big 12. Overall, do I think they can put two teams in? Not this year because of all the dismantling that has occurred. But if, you know, BYU goes undefeated, I don't think Cincinnati plays them. Cincinnati might play them. This is something I got to check real quick. No, Cincinnati doesn't play them. So if Cincinnati can go undefeated, BYU goes undefeated. No, they do play them. My bad. So you're probably not going to get two teams in just because of how the schedule lucked out. But this was definitely a year, like, if certain games went the opposite way, you could get two teams out of the Big 12. Two teams out of the ACC. You probably get three teams apiece out of each conference, the Big Ten and the SEC, giving you 10 teams, giving you 4 open bids with Notre Dame and Group of 5 taking 2. So you have 2 more at-larges. But with the way everything has transpired, I don't see the ACC nor the Big 12 getting 2 teams in because of all the dismantling. And they're not being respected in terms of schedule. So that gives the open slots to the SEC and the Big Ten. But overall, college football for Week 9, I think last week was a solid A. I say this week is going to be another A, if not A minus. But like always, check out the socials. I'll make sure the links are in the description, and let's enjoy some college football.